So we're moving in here to kind of the health of the mother, because I find that a lot of Christians, right, they'll say, I'm against abortion, and they may even say, well, I'm even against abortion in the cases of rape and incest. But if the mother's life is in jeopardy, then they'll say abortion is okay. Where do we stand on that? How do we respond to that?
So we need to begin with by saying, well, let's even use a term that you used, which I would say to the person in conversation, which is if the mother's life is in danger. So I would say, what is a mother? What makes a woman a mother? I am a woman, but I'm not a mother. Now, we could argue I'm a spiritual mother, but the point is, I'm not a biological mother. I'm a woman who's not a mother. So what distinguishes women in general from mothers specifically?
They have offspring.
That they have offspring. So therefore, we know now to be a mother involves the presence of another. And it involves a very special relationship, one of nurture and care for the more vulnerable party. So starting with that, then I would say, okay, in this scenario you've described, this is cause for concern. We ought to respond. The question is, how ought we respond? And in terms of figuring out our how, the beginning place has to be two lives are involved, the mother and the child. And we have to value both lives equally. We recognize both are unrepeatable and irreplaceable. Both are willed and loved in the eyes of God. And the mother isn't more important than the child. The child is not more important than the mother. They're both equal. But we recognize, because one party is more vulnerable, the younger preborn child, that child is actually dependent on the mother, equal to but dependent on the mother. So if we want to preserve the child's life for a good portion of the pregnancy, we actually need to preserve the mother's life. So that would be the general information I would propose at the beginning. And then I would say, in order to determine how we ought to respond, we can acknowledge that there are some paths we could take that are immoral. And although those aren't open to us, it doesn't mean that there aren't other paths we could take that would be moral. So, for example, imagine you're driving home and there's a big orange sign up that says, road closed, detour ahead. And then you follow these arrows that take you all around a neighborhood you normally don't go through to ultimately get home. Do you still get home? Yes, but not the way you normally take. That option wasn't open to you. You still reached your final destination, but you went around a longer path. So in the same way, I would say when the woman's life is in danger, we want to reach that end goal of saving her life. But road closed, detour ahead, the one path that is not open to us is the path that would involve directly and intentionally ending the child's life, because it's wrong to directly and intentionally end the life of an innocent human being.
This is why I so appreciate your consistency here. Because it's very difficult for me to listen to politicians who want to say that they're pro-life and then they throw up these exceptions. Because the question is it ever justifiable for a big, strong person to kill a little weak person? Or a little weak, innocent person?
That's the question.
And if it's not, then you just cannot. You've got to be consistent.
Correct.
I get from a legislative point of view that you might have to kind of, I don't know, play that game a little bit so your argument is more palatable to people. But you just have to be consistent. So if you can never directly kill an innocent human being, then
that road is closed.
So tell me what to do.
It's closed. So then we go around the bend and we say, okay, well, first of all, what is the situation? And how do we best respond to the pathology that is present?
Give us a common pathology.
So let me give you two scenarios that I think help make the pro-life position clear. One would be chorioamnionitis, which I'll explain in a moment. The other one would be a tubal pregnancy, and that's going to happen in the first trimester. Chorioamnionitis can happen later in pregnancy. So let's start there with chorioamnionitis. So that's infected membranes. That's a severe infection that results in the case of a pregnant woman. And if the infection remains in her body, she will die. And if she dies, the baby dies. So in the case of chorioamnionitis, what you need to do is get the infected membranes out of her body. You need to get the infection out of her body. The way to do that is to induce labor. Remove the infection. This is where in philosophy, of course, you would have covered this a lot. The principle of double effect comes into play, which says you may never do evil to bring about a good. You can only do good or neutral actions.
Mm-hmm.
Acknowledging that when you do good or neutral actions, you can have effects.
Mm-hmm.
You can have a good effect and you can have a bad effect. But the effects are different from the action itself, which can't be bad or can't be evil. The action itself has to be good or neutral. So in the case of inducing labor in the presence of a serious infection that threatens two people's lives, the action is good. You're removing an infection. The good effect is the mom does not die because the infection is out of her body. The bad effect is if it is prior to viability, prior to our ability to have technology that would keep the child alive out of the womb, such as an incubator. If it's prior to that, and viability, I mean, people generally will say 24 weeks is where a child can survive outside the womb, but there have been cases where babies have survived at 21, 22, 23 weeks. But let's say we're at 18 weeks and we don't have time to wait because of the rapidly progressing infection, that the induction of labor is not a bad action to kill the child, it's a good action to remove the infection. But in inducing labor, the baby's going to come to, the baby's too young to survive in an incubator, the child dies. Not because we've directly killed the child, but we've responded to the presence of a pathology, which if left alone would have resulted in the demise of the child and of the mother.
So this, what we're talking about for those at home, is not an abortion.
Correct. It's a ethical medical response to the presence of a pathology. Pregnancy is not a pathology. A human being is not a pathology, but an infection can be a pathology. Cancer is a pathology. So let's take, before we go on to tubal pregnancy, let's say you have cancer. And let's say a woman is 23 weeks and they find out she has cancer in her body. And the doctors say, we need to give you chemotherapy. In that case, if waiting one more week would not threaten her life, and we can say, let's wait until the 24-week mark, then we'll induce labor to put the baby in an incubator, and then we're going to give you all the cancer treatment that you need so as to not harm the child, then that's the best of both worlds. We're now working to preserve the child's life with the technology we have, as well as responding to the pathology within her. Now, let's say she's maybe 15 weeks and the doctors say, we don't have time to wait 9 weeks. It's life or death. We have to administer chemo, and this could hurt your child. This could kill your child. In that situation, it would be ethical to administer chemo if the mother so chose, because we're not giving chemo to kill the child or hurt the child. We're giving chemo to kill the cancer, which is in the woman's body. And it's possible, actually, there have been cases where pregnant women have had chemo and it's actually not negatively harmed the child.
What a heartbreaking thing to have to go through, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Now, but let's take it to the extreme and say that it would harm the child. Even that, if you cannot wait, could be justified. Now, two things. One, you could have a situation where you could wait a week or two and then you end up being able to preserve both lives. Alternatively, you could have a situation where a woman in an act of heroism says, if I can be alive long enough to carry this child to term, but I'm really creating a situation where the cancer is just going to take over me. In an act of heroism, she may choose to do that. And there's a woman back in Canada where I live who found herself in that situation. She had about a 2-year-old son, was pregnant, and the doctor said, look, we need to do chemo, we need to intervene, but you know, your pregnancy will end, the child will die. And she looked at her 2-year-old son and she said, I would die for him. My
wife did this, it's almost bringing me to tears. When Liam was born, it was an emergency section and the drugs hadn't even kicked in. You know, it was drastic. And I remember her very much saying, and I forget exactly how she said it, but it was all about Liam. It was all about saving Liam, and it was almost like her life was whatever. It's fine if I don't live. That's okay. Save him. And I'm like, I'm not okay with this.
Right. Of course, you're torn. And
of course, that's a heroic thing.
Yes, right. And that's where we see. So. But the point is that either way, whether you choose that act of heroism, whether we can actually wait until viability, or whether we don't have the technology to save the child, the point is we're not acting to directly and intentionally end the life of an innocent human being. We're acknowledging there's the presence of two parties, and we're going to do our darndest to save both. We may not succeed. So now let me give a concrete case where we will not succeed, and that's a tubal pregnancy.
All right, explain what that is.
So people think pregnancy happens in the womb. It doesn't. The beginning of pregnancy happens in the fallopian tube. So the sperm makes its way through the uterus into the fallopian tube where the woman's egg is hanging out.
Yep.
Fertilization happens in the fallopian tube. Once fertilization happens, you have your genetically distinct new human being, different from the mother and father, growing as the one-celled embryo, and then 2 cells, 4 cells, 8, and doubling, and so forth.
Yeah.
In a normal, healthy, functioning pregnancy, within about a week, that embryo will move with the little hairs through the uterus, through the uterine tubes, the fallopian tubes, will be swept through the tubes into the uterus, implant, and grow for 9 months. In the case of a tubal pregnancy, the preborn child does not make it into the uterus. For whatever reason, the child gets lodged in the fallopian tube, and that can happen for a number of reasons. She might have scar tissue from previous surgery. She might have scar tissue or problems internally because of an STI. She might have tubal structure or function problems. Regardless, there's some pathology that has prevented the embryo from going into the uterus, and the embryo stays in the tube. But the embryo is going to keep growing and developing and do at the normal stages of pregnancy what the embryo would do in the uterus. So as the embryo begins to get to the stage of implantation where the embryo is going to burrow into what would be the wall of the uterus and implant and grow for 9 months, the embryo starts doing that in the tube. Well, the tube is not designed for that. And so as the embryo is burrowing in and implanting and growing, that tube's going to expand. And it will expand so much that if left alone, will burst. And if that tube bursts, the mother can die, and the baby is obviously going to die. So in that situation, there are a number of things that you can do. And the one that I tell people that I would do, because sometimes when you say, well, this is what you should do, people say, if you were in that situation, would you do it? And I say, yes, I would. I would have what's called a salpingectomy done. It's not an abortion.
A salpingectomy.
Salpingectomy. And so that is a procedure where the section of fallopian tube that the child is in that's expanding and growing and basically is now pathological, that section of the fallopian tube is cut out and removed. If we could then take that embryo in the tube or without the tube and implant the embryo somewhere, we would do that. We lack the technology to be able to do that. So principle of double effect, unfortunately, the child dies because we cannot save the child. The mother lives because that section of fallopian tube, which is her body, which is designed for the transport of the child, but not the implantation of the child, which if left alone would have resulted in the demise of the child and her. That section of her body, of the tube, that part of her body was removed, therefore she's not going to die. Now some abortion supporters will say, wait, if the embryo over here is dead because you did a salpingectomy, or the embryo is dead because you directly targeted the embryo, you aborted the embryo, you tried to kill it. No difference.
Same result.
Exactly. And so that's where we say, okay, this is where we need to look at a situation and analyze it, not just from the end result, but from the means. How did we get there? Action and intention. What is my intention, first of all? And what is the very action that I'm committing? So in the case of an abortion, the very action is targeting the baby's body. And the intention with abortion is never to save the child. It's always to bring about the demise of the child. In the case of a salpingectomy, the action is targeting the tube. The intention is to try to save both lives, but we lack the technology to do so. So the way to round this out by way of an analogy that I'll provide to people to make it crystal clear is I'll say, imagine 2 people are drowning.
Actually, I was about to bring this up.
Oh, were you? Oh, do you want to?
Well, I was.
What's your analogy?
Well, no, I hadn't thought about this a great deal, but suppose I'm out on the lake and we're canoeing, and my wife and son are in another canoe, and it capsizes, and they're both struggling, and we're in the middle of the lake, and I want to save them both desperately. But suppose I lack the strength to save both of them, then I have 2 options. I either save one of them, don't save either, or try to save both unsuccessfully.
Right.
And so it would seem that the best thing to do in that situation would be to successfully save one.
Right. Absolutely. You try to save both. And the right thing is to never directly and intentionally kill one. So you know, let's say they've separated.
I'm not holding Liam under.
Right. While you're pulling Cameron. Exactly. And so the point is that let's say they're far apart, and you swim to the closest one. Let's say it's Cameron, and you've got her now on your back, and you're swimming towards Liam. If you get to him, his head's above water, and you push his head down, there's a problem there. You've just killed him. But if just before you reach him, his head goes underwater, and you can't find him, then you've been unable to save him. Now, in both scenarios, he's dead either way. But in one case, you directly killed him. In the other case, you couldn't save him. So
Yes.
that's why when the
Okay.
woman's life is in danger, you do a self-injectomy versus doing an abortion. Yeah, the end result is the dead baby in either case. But the means are so profoundly different. In one case, we did not have what was needed to preserve the child's life. In the other case, by way of doing an abortion, that would be directly and intentionally acting on the child's body to bring about the child's death. So that's always wrong.
Gosh, fantastic.
So it's so interesting when all this comes up politically and people talk about, well, this law and that law, and we need these exceptions for the woman's life being in danger. I always want to say, can we just slow down and talk this through? Like, we don't need these exceptions, and saying that we have a pro-life law that never permits abortion is not saying line up all these women for death because that's what will happen. No, I've just given 3 examples: cancer, chorioamnionitis, tubal pregnancy, where we can intervene and save the mother and do our best to try to save the baby too.
Yo, thanks for watching. You can watch the entire episode on YouTube if you want. You can listen to it at The Matt Fradd Show by subscribing on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And feel free to support me, patreon.com/Matt Fradd.